In downtown Austin, a quiet contract developer named Brooke Carter was about to expose a lie buried under millions in corporate profit. What started as a simple morning commute to a tech office with free cold brew and glass walls took a shocking turn when she came face to face with her name, listed on a $17,000 invoice she'd never seen. Brooke Carter wasn't your typical junior coder. For years, she had worked midnight shifts at a diner, teaching herself to code on napkins and borrowed laptops, known only by a GitHub alias and the bugs she squashed before sunrise. When she discovered her code was being sold at 26 times her pay, while others claimed her work, she had no idea she was walking into a digital warzone disguised as a startup. Brooke responded not with rage, but with silence and code, the kind of code that would upend everything they thought they owned. What began as a desperate contract gig would become a blueprint for dismantling a system built on theft. The Austin tech scene would never be the same after Brooke Carter reminded them exactly who builds the future, and who really owns it. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. $15 an hour felt like winning the lottery when I got the call from Gridforge's talent acquisition team. The woman on the phone, Melissa or Melanie something corporate and bright, told me they were excited to bring me aboard as a contract developer. The Austin tech scene was brutal for someone like me. No computer science degree, no bootcamp certificate, just a GitHub portfolio built between graveyard shifts at a 24-hour diner and weekend freelance gigs fixing WordPress sites for local businesses. The Gridforge office sat in the heart of downtown Austin, all glass and steel with a rooftop deck that overlooked Lady Bird Lake. The lobby had exposed brick walls lined with monitors displaying real-time metrics and a coffee bar that served nitro cold brew on tap. Reception pointed me toward the elevator with a smile that seemed genuine enough but didn't quite reach her eyes. I rode up to the 4th floor clutching a folder with printed copies of my portfolio, even though everything was already uploaded to their system. Old habits from a world where backup plans mattered. My desk was in the back corner near what looked like an intern bullpen folding table height adjustable chair that squeaked when I leaned back. No nameplate but a sticky note with Brooke Carter, temporary contractor, written in blue ballpoint. The setup felt temporary in the way that suggested it might always be temporary, but I didn't care. I had a desk at a real tech company with benefits pending and healthcare options that didn't involve crossing my fingers every time I got a cold. The first week blurred together in a comfortable rhythm of Git commit, Slack notifications, and the kind of focused coding work I'd been craving. Tom Hensley, the CTO, stopped by my desk on day 3 with a backend ticket that had been sitting in the queue for 2 weeks. Legacy database integration, he said with a grin that suggested this was either a test or a punishment, maybe both. The previous developer who'd worked on it had left abruptly, Tom explained, and they needed someone who could dig into messy code without complaining about architecture decisions made years ago. I loved messy code the way some people loved crossword puzzles. Every tangled function and hard-coded variable was a problem waiting to be solved. I spent the next 4 days unraveling a payment processing system that had been held together with duct tape and wishful thinking. When I finally pushed the fix, the whole thing ran 30% faster with half the memory footprint. David Kim, one of the senior engineers, stopped by my desk that afternoon with actual enthusiasm in his voice. Whoever wrote this knows what they're doing, he said, scrolling through my commit history. Clean, elegant, efficient. You should be proud of this work. I was proud right up until I saw David's name on the deployment log as primary contributor with mine listed under assisted by in smaller font. It stung, but I told myself that was how these things worked. Junior developers support senior engineers who take responsibility for production releases. That made sense even if it felt wrong. The second week brought another ticket, this one marked high priority client deliverable. Maya Ramirez, the project manager who'd been quietly watching from 2 desks over, finally introduced herself properly. You're the one who fixed the payment system, she said. It wasn't really a question. David's been taking credit for that, hasn't he? I shrugged, trying to seem casual about it. He's the senior engineer, it's his responsibility. Maya's laugh was short and sharp. Honey, that's not how responsibility works around here, but you'll figure that out. She paused, looking around the office as if checking for listeners. Keep your head down, do good work, and document everything you do. Trust me on that last part. Friday afternoon brought the kind of mistake that changes everything. Melissa from accounting sent an email meant for Tom to the entire engineering distribution list. The subject line read Haverton Bank billing reconciliation, and the attachment was a PDF invoice charging $400 per hour for back-end development services rendered by contractor B. Carter. The math was simple, brutal, and clear. They were billing clients 26 times what they paid me. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred together. $400 an hour for my code, my fixes, my late nights debugging systems that had been broken long before I arrived. The invoice listed 42 hours of work over 2 weeks, which meant they'd billed Haverton Bank nearly $17,000 for code I'd written while eating ramen and wondering if my car would pass inspection. Melissa sent a follow-up email 20 minutes later asking everyone to disregard the previous message and delete it immediately, but screenshots live forever, and I'd already saved mine to a personal folder. That evening I sat in my one-bedroom apartment staring at the invoice printout and finally understood what Maya meant about documenting everything. The illusion wasn't that they'd hired me to code, the illusion was that they'd hired me at all. My laptop hummed quietly on the kitchen table at 2 in the morning. The blue glow of my terminal, the only light in the apartment. I'd started staying up late not because I had to but because I wanted to. The work at Gridforge filled 40 hours, but my brain needed more, needed problems that belonged to me and solutions that carried my name. The system I was building started simple enough, a lightweight backend framework that could handle the kind of database operations I spent all day fixing at the office, but cleaner, more efficient, built from the ground up instead of patched together from legacy code that someone else had abandoned. The first module took shape over 3 sleepless nights, a user authentication system that could scale from hundreds to millions of requests without breaking a sweat. Gridforge's authentication system, by comparison, was held together with hard-coded passwords and prayer. Maya's Slack message came in during lunch on Tuesday, just 4 words, but they hit like a confession. "I've seen the billing logs too," followed by a pause that lasted long enough for me to wonder if she was typing something else, then simply, "Be careful." I wanted to ask what she meant, but the office was the kind of open floor plan where conversations traveled, and Tom Hensley had a habit of walking up behind people when they were typing. Maya and I developed a language of meaningful glances and careful timing. She'd nod toward the coffee machine when she had something to say, and I'd follow a few minutes later for conversations that sounded like small talk but carried weight. "How's the new project going?" she'd ask, stirring sugar into coffee she didn't need sweetened. "Learning a lot about system architecture," I'd reply, meaning I was building something they couldn't touch. The restrictions started small enough that I almost missed them at first. My Git access got downgraded from direct push to pull request only, standard procedure, Tom explained, for contractors working on client code, but Noah Whitaker, who'd started the same week as me, still had direct access even though his code needed more review than mine. Then my commit history started disappearing, not deleted exactly but filtered through senior engineer accounts. David Kim's name appeared on my database optimization work. Jessica Torres got credit for the API endpoints I'd built from scratch. Even my comments in the code got edited to remove my handle and replace it with theirs. Noah noticed it too, but when I brought it up during our usual Thursday lunch, he got uncomfortable in a way that felt like distance. "Maybe they're just following protocol," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Contractors probably have different rules than full-time employees," but Noah was a contractor too and his name was still on his commits. "You're overthinking this, Brooke, it's just business." The word business sat between us like a wall. I realized Noah wasn't uncomfortable because he disagreed with what was happening. He was uncomfortable because he agreed with it and didn't want to be associated with someone who might make waves. Friday evening I was packing up my laptop when Tom stopped by my desk with the kind of casual approach that felt rehearsed. "Hey Brooke, great work on the Hartwell integration." Hartwell was a new client whose legacy system I'd spent 3 days untangling. "We're going to need you to walk Jessica through your approach for the documentation." Jessica Torres was the senior developer who'd signed off on the work, who'd presented it to the client, who'd billed 200 hours at $400 each for code she'd never seen until it was finished. "Sure," I said, because what else could I say? Should I schedule something with her? "Actually, let's keep it informal. Just send her your notes and she'll take it from there. We want to make sure the client sees a consistent voice on all communications." Consistent voice meaning not mine. I drove home through Austin traffic thinking about voices and consistency and the way my code was becoming anonymous. The system I was building at night felt more real than anything I touched during the day. It was growing into something powerful, elegant, efficient, everything. Gridforge's infrastructure wasn't. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, I'd made a decision. The code I wrote after hours would stay mine, completely mine, stored on personal hardware, kept off any network they could access, documented in my own voice with my own comments and my own architectural decisions. If they wanted to erase me during the day, I'd build something at night they couldn't touch. The authentication module was finished, the database optimization layer was taking shape, and I was already sketching out the third component, an auto-scaling system that could handle traffic spikes without human intervention. Something that would make their bloated infrastructure look like what it was: expensive, inefficient, and completely unnecessary. I opened my laptop in the kitchen and got back to work. 3 weeks into building my night system, I realized I wasn't just coding anymore. I was designing a replacement for everything Gridforge did poorly, which turned out to be almost everything. The auto-scaling module I'd finished over the weekend could handle traffic loads that would crash their current setup. The compliance checking system I was testing could catch regulatory violations their lawyers missed. Every day during daylight hours, I watched them announce a streamlining initiative with the kind of corporate enthusiasm that probably sounded impressive to clients. Tom Hensley presented metrics that showed 20% improvement in system response time since January. He called it the result of innovative architecture decisions and strategic optimization. The metrics were real. The 20% improvement was real. What Tom didn't mention was that every single optimization had come from fixes I'd written between midnight and dawn on my kitchen table. Maya found me at the coffee machine that afternoon with a stack of printed emails tucked under her arm. Restructuring meeting next week, she said quietly. They're realigning engineering teams. Realigning was corporate speak for cutting costs, which was corporate speak for eliminating contractors. Noah seems worried. She continued, he's been asking about conversion to full-time. Noah had stopped eating lunch with me 2 weeks ago, started sitting with the senior developers who treated him like a mascot, someone safe who wouldn't ask uncomfortable questions about billing rates or attribution. What about you? Maya asked, worried. I stirred my coffee and considered the question honestly. Not really. Maya studied my face with the kind of attention that suggested she was seeing something new that's either very smart or very dangerous, maybe both. That evening I finished the second major module of my system. The auto-scaling architecture with built-in compliance checks was elegant in a way that made me proud. It could monitor server loads, predict traffic spikes, and spin up additional resources automatically while ensuring every transaction met regulatory requirements for data privacy, financial reporting, and user consent. GridForge's current system required manual intervention for scaling, ran compliance checks as an afterthought, and crashed predictably during high traffic periods. The difference wasn't subtle, it was generational. I encrypted the module on a portable drive that never touched their network, stored the encryption key in a password manager they'd never seen, and documented everything in comments they'd never read. Monday morning brought the restructuring announcement, delivered with the kind of forced positivity that made everyone uncomfortable. Tom Hensley stood in front of the engineering team explaining how they were optimizing for efficiency and focus. Contract workers would be reassigned to support roles while full-time engineers took on more strategic responsibilities. We want to make sure our most complex work gets the attention it deserves from our most experienced team members, Tom said, looking directly at me while he spoke. Contractors will focus on documentation, testing, and support functions. David Kim asked about timeline. Tom said implementation would begin immediately. Jessica Torres asked about current projects. Tom said they'd be transitioned smoothly with full knowledge transfer. I didn't ask anything because I already knew the answer. Wednesday afternoon, Tom called me into a conference room with glass walls that let the entire office watch our conversation. He had a printed presentation that looked professional in the way that suggested someone had spent time making bad news look reasonable. Brooke, we're really excited about your new role, he said, sliding a packet across the table. Documentation specialist with a focus on system architecture. You'll be working directly with our senior team to create comprehensive technical guides. The job description was 3 pages of corporate language that translated to taking credit away from my code and giving it to someone else permanently. The salary was a 15% cut from my already low contractor rate. You'll be working closely with Jessica on the Hartwell documentation and with David on the database optimization guides. We want to make sure everything is properly documented before we scale these solutions to other clients. Solutions I had built, fixes I had written, optimizations I had coded, all of it about to be documented, explained, and attributed to people who couldn't recreate it if their jobs depended on it. This is a great opportunity to really understand how enterprise systems work, Tom continued, and who knows, maybe down the line we can talk about other opportunities. I looked at the offer letter, at the reduced salary, at the title that made me sound like a technical writer instead of the person who'd actually built the systems they were documenting. Can I think about it? Tom's smile was the kind that didn't expect resistance. Of course, take the weekend, but we'll need an answer Monday so we can keep things moving smoothly. I walked back to my desk, past the intern bullpen, past Noah, who was carefully not making eye contact, past Maya, who was pretending to read email while watching everything. That evening I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and my system humming in the background. The hidden engine was nearly complete. 3 modules that could replace their entire infrastructure, a 4th that could scale beyond anything they'd imagined, documentation that would make replication impossible, and code that belonged completely to me. I opened a new terminal window and started typing. The encrypted message arrived on a Saturday morning through a Proton Mail account I'd never used for anything except throwaway registrations. The sender was listed as a string of random characters, but the message was specific enough to make my hands shake while reading it. GridForge's infrastructure is failing in ways you probably don't realize. Your patches are the only thing keeping their client systems operational. They're suppressing error logs to hide systemic problems. You should know what you're actually fixing before they bury you like they buried me. A friend who escaped. Attached was a compressed file that required 2 passwords to decrypt. The first was embedded in the message text. The second took me 20 minutes to figure out, a reference to Austin's tech scene that only someone who'd worked at GridForge would understand. The files inside made me feel sick. Months of error logs that had been deliberately excluded from standard reports, critical system failures that had been logged as minor incidents, client complaints that had been reclassified as user Errors. The pattern was clear and damning. GridForge's infrastructure was collapsing in slow motion, held together by patches I'd written without knowing how essential they were. Database crashes that would have cost Hartwell Bank millions in transaction fees prevented by the optimization I'd written in February. Server failures that would have brought down 3 client systems simultaneously avoided by the scaling fix I'd built in March. Compliance violations that would have triggered federal audits resolved by validation checks I'd coded thinking they were routine maintenance. Every fix had been logged under senior engineer accounts. Every solution had been presented to clients as proactive system management. Every patch had generated billing hours at premium rates while I earned $15 an hour and wondered why my contract kept getting extended. The second message came 12 hours later from the same anonymous account, Ari Zhang, former systems architect at GridForge. Until I tried to document what was really happening to the infrastructure, Tom Hensley had me blacklisted from every major tech company in Austin. Don't let them disappear you the way they disappeared me. I googled Ari Zhang, found a LinkedIn profile that went dark 8 months ago, a GitHub account with no activity since last summer, and a single Glassdoor review for GridForge that had been flagged for removal but was still cached by search engines. Brilliant engineers doing world-class work while management takes credit and senior staff gets paid for their output. The technical debt is massive and getting worse. Infrastructure is held together by undocumented fixes that will fail catastrophically when the people who wrote them leave. Avoid unless you enjoy working for free while someone else gets rich. The review was dated exactly 2 weeks before Ari's LinkedIn went inactive. I spent Sunday analyzing the error logs, cross-referencing them with my own work, tracking the timeline of failures and fixes. The picture that emerged was worse than I'd imagined. GridForge wasn't just taking credit for my code, they were completely dependent on it. Their senior engineers were maintaining systems they didn't understand, implementing fixes they couldn't replicate, scaling solutions they hadn't designed. If I left tomorrow, their infrastructure would collapse within weeks, taking their clients and their $400 billing rates with it. The realization changed everything. I wasn't just an underpaid contractor being exploited, I was the single point of failure, keeping a fraud from being exposed. Monday morning, I walked into the office with Tom's offer letter in my bag and a USB drive in my pocket. The drive contained my entire night system, encrypted with military-grade security and documented in excruciating detail, every module, every function, every architectural decision explained in my own words. I also loaded it with something else, a kill switch that could remotely disable any system using my original code. Tom was waiting by my desk with coffee and the kind of aggressive friendliness that suggested he expected good news. Brooke, ready to make this official. I looked around the office at Maya, who was pretending not to listen, at Noah, who was actively avoiding eye contact, at Jessica and David, who were discussing my database work as if they'd designed it themselves. I need another week to think about it. Tom's smile flickered for just a moment. The offer is time sensitive, we need to keep moving on these projects, then you'll have to wait. That afternoon, Maya found me at the coffee machine with an expression I'd never seen before, relief mixed with something that looked like admiration. You said no. I asked for more time. Same thing. In corporate speak. She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. You know they can't replace you, right? They seem to think they can. Maya laughed quietly. They think they can replace what you do, they can't replace what you know. The difference is about to become very expensive for them. I spent that evening adding the final components to my system and testing the kill switch. It worked perfectly. The compliance audit notification came in on a Tuesday morning, marked urgent client requirement, and copied to half the engineering team. Hartwell Bank's legal department had requested a full system review of their payment processing infrastructure, standard procedure for financial institutions, but the timing felt deliberate. Maya forwarded me the email with a single word comment: coincidence. It wasn't. The audit would scan every piece of code, every database connection, every server configuration, looking for unauthorized modifications, custom implementations, and undocumented systems. Exactly the kind of deep dive that would reveal my test environment and the sophisticated backend system I'd been building in parallel to their production setup. I had 48 hours to clean up any trace of unauthorized code. Wednesday afternoon, Brad Morrison from IT security knocked on my desk with the kind of polite smile that meant trouble. His laptop bag looked heavier than usual, and he was carrying a tablet that displayed what looked like network monitoring software. Brooke, we need to run a quick scan of your development environment. Routine stuff for the Hartwell audit. Routine was corporate speak for we found something and we want to see how you react. I watched Brad plug a device into my workstation Ethernet port. His tablet lit up with file directories, database connections, and process logs. The scan took 12 minutes, which was 11 minutes longer than it should have taken for a routine check. Interesting setup you have here, Brad said, scrolling through results. Looks like you've been doing some custom development. Custom development was IT speak for unauthorized code that we're going to need to examine. Just testing some optimization approaches, I said, which was technically true. Brad's expression shifted from polite to concerned. We're going to need to quarantine this environment until we can review everything properly. Security protocol for any undocumented systems. Quarantine meant locked out. Friday morning, Tom Hensley called me into the glass Conference room with Jessica Torres and David Kim flanking him like corporate bodyguards. The tablet Brad had used was sitting on the table next to a printed report that looked official and damning. Brooke, we found some concerning activity in your development environment, Tom began. Unauthorized database connections, custom authentication systems, undocumented API endpoints. He slid the report across the table. The cover page read security analysis, unauthorized system development contractor. Station 47B, my desk number. This is sophisticated work, Jessica added, beyond the scope of your current role and outside the parameters of your contract. Sophisticated was corporate speak for threatening. Where did this come from? David asked, leaning forward with the kind of aggressive curiosity that suggested he already knew the answer. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I looked at the three of them sitting there dissecting my code like it was evidence in a criminal case. Tom with his practiced concern, Jessica with her territorial defensiveness, David with his technical jealousy. I built it, I said simply. The silence lasted long enough for me to count heartbeats. Asterisk. You built an enterprise-grade back-end system in your spare time? Tom's voice carried the kind of disbelief that sounded like an accusation. Yes, using company resources, my laptop, my time, my apartment. Jessica leaned back in her chair. This creates intellectual property concerns. Anything developed while under contract potentially belongs to Gridforge. Potentially was legal speak for we're going to steal it. The contract specifies work for hire on assigned projects only, I said, because I'd read every word of that document. This wasn't assigned. Tom's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Brooke, we appreciate your initiative, but we can't have unauthorized systems running parallel to client infrastructure. It creates security risks, compliance issues, potential liability. Liability was executive speak for threat to our control. We'll need you to transfer all related code documentation and access credentials to our security team, David added, and we'll need to discuss reassignment to a role more appropriate to your current skill level. Reassignment was corporate speak for demotion. I looked at the three of them sitting there trying to figure out how to steal my work without admitting they needed it, trying to punish me for being better at their jobs than they were, trying to maintain control over systems they couldn't understand or replicate. No, I said. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Tom's expression shifted from corporate concern to something harder. Brooke, this isn't optional. The code is encrypted on personal hardware stored off-site, documented in my own systems. You have no access to any of it. Jessica's laugh was sharp. You can't hold company resources hostage. It's not company resources. It's my work built on my time with my tools stored on my equipment. David leaned forward. Anything developed while under contract wasn't developed under contract, was developed at home on weekends and nights as personal projects, completely separate from any Gridforge systems. Tom stood up. The meeting was over. Brooke, we're going to need some time to review the legal implications of this situation until we sort things out. You're reassigned to documentation duties effective immediately. Documentation duties was corporate speak for exile. Your access to development systems is suspended pending resolution of intellectual property questions. Suspended was corporate speak for locked out. I walked back to my desk past the intern bullpen, past Noah, who was staring at his screen with the kind of focus that meant he'd been listening, past Maya, who caught my eye and nodded once. My keycard still worked for another hour, long enough to clear my personal files and download my commit history. Then the red light started flashing and I was officially shut out of the systems I'd been holding together that evening. I sat in my apartment with my laptop open and my encrypted drive plugged in. The system I'd built was complete, elegant, powerful, and completely mine. They could lock me out of their broken infrastructure, but they couldn't lock me out of the solution. The documentation assignment came with a cubicle in the basement near the server room and a desktop computer that looked like it had been rescued from a .com era bankruptcy auction. The monitor flickered when I moved the mouse and the keyboard had keys that stuck when pressed too hard. Maya visited on my second day with coffee and the kind of sympathetic expression usually reserved for funerals. How are you holding up? Fine, I said, which was true in the way that meant I was planning something. They're scared of you, she said quietly. Tom's been in meetings all week with legal and the board. Scared was a good start. The desktop computer was ancient, but it was connected to Gridforge's network, which meant access to internal systems, error logs, deployment records, and the kind of historical data that told stories management didn't want told. My new supervisor was a middle manager named Derek, who explained my responsibilities with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. Document existing systems, create user guides, update technical specifications, make sure everything is properly attributed to the correct team members. Properly attributed was corporate speak for remove any trace of your involvement. I spent the first week mapping Gridforge's infrastructure, not the sanitized version from their marketing materials, but the real architecture with all its patches, workarounds, and critical dependencies. Every fix I'd written was logged in deployment records but attributed to senior engineers. Every optimization carried timestamps that proved I'd written them, but signatures that claimed someone else owned Then the pattern was systematic and damning. By the second week I'd traced every major client deliverable back to code I'd written, database optimizations that prevented Hartwell's transaction failures, API improvements that kept Meridian Tech's user authentication from crashing, scaling solutions that allowed Vertex Capital's trading platform to handle market volatility, all of it billed at premium rates, all of it attributed to senior staff, all of it dependent on fixes that only I understood. Maya started bringing me compliance checklists during her afternoon coffee runs, documents that showed which security protocols Tom's team had been skipping, which regulatory requirements they'd been ignoring, which industry standards they'd been failing to meet. These are supposed to be filed quarterly, she said, sliding a stack of papers across my desk. Haven't been updated since last year. The checklists revealed gaps that should have triggered federal audits, violations that could result in million-dollar fines, failures that could shut down client systems overnight. I began building a different kind of system, not code but documentation, a comprehensive record of every shortcut, every ignored protocol, every suppressed error, every fraudulent billing hour. The work was meticulous and satisfying in the way that solving complex puzzles always satisfied me, except instead of optimizing database queries, I was optimizing evidence. 3 weeks into my exile, Tom Hensley made a mistake. He scheduled a company-wide demo of the new Hartwell integration, the same system I'd built, the same code I'd written, the same architecture I'd designed, now being presented as the collaborative effort of GridForge senior engineering team. I watched from the back of the conference room as Jessica Torres explained database optimization techniques she'd never implemented, as David Kim demonstrated scaling solutions he'd never designed, as Tom Hensley took credit for innovation he'd never imagined. The presentation was flawless except for one small detail. During the Q&A session, someone from the sales team asked about error handling in high-traffic scenarios. Jessica fumbled the answer. David looked confused. Tom jumped in with corporate buzzwords that meant nothing. I could have answered the question in my sleep because I'd written the error handling code, but they couldn't explain how it worked because they'd never understood what they were selling. After the meeting, Maya found me at my basement desk with an expression I'd never seen before, something between admiration and alarm. You're documenting everything, aren't you? Just following instructions, creating comprehensive technical guides. Brooke, what are you planning? I looked at the files spread across my desk: deployment logs, compliance failures, billing discrepancies, a complete record of how GridForge had built their success on stolen work and fraudulent practices. I'm not planning anything, I said, I'm just making sure everything is properly documented. Maya nodded slowly. What happens when you're done documenting? I saved my work, encrypted the files, and backed everything up to 3 separate drives. Then we'll see who really owns what. That evening, I received another message from Ari Zhang, this time with a subject line that made me smile: ready to take them down. The attached file contained contact information for a journalist who specialized in tech industry fraud, a federal investigator who handled intellectual property theft, and a lawyer who represented whistleblowers pro bono. But I wasn't ready to blow everything up, not yet. First, I had one more system to build, not code this time, but something more powerful: a perfect record of every lie they'd told, every credit they'd stolen, every dollar they'd made from work they couldn't do themselves. The paper trail was almost complete. The decision to push their bastardized version of my system live came down from Tom Hensley on a Friday afternoon with the kind of corporate urgency that ignored technical reality. Hartwell Bank was demanding faster deployment schedules, and GridForge needed to prove they could deliver enterprise solutions without delay. Maya texted me from the 4th floor: they're pushing the Hartwell integration to production Monday morning. Jessica's team hasn't finished testing. Jessica's team meant the people who were trying to reverse engineer my work without understanding the underlying architecture. They'd been struggling for 3 weeks to replicate functionality I'd built in 3 days. I sat in my basement cubicle staring at the flickering monitor and realized this was the moment I'd been building toward, not the confrontation in the conference room, not the exile to documentation duties, but this, the moment when their incompetence would collide with client expectations and expose everything. The kill switch I'd embedded in my original system wasn't malicious, it was protective. A failsafe that would prevent unauthorized deployment of incomplete code, the kind of safeguard any responsible developer would include, but they didn't know it existed because they'd never bothered to understand what they were stealing. Monday morning brought the kind of artificial energy that accompanies doomed projects. Jessica Torres arrived early. David Kim stayed late over the weekend. Tom Hensley sent company-wide emails about commitment to excellence and client satisfaction. At 9:47 a.m. they pushed version 2.0 of the Hartwell integration to production. By 10:15 a.m. the first error reports started trickling in: authentication timeouts on the login portal, payment processing delays that triggered fraud alerts, database connection failures that locked users out of their accounts. The system wasn't crashing dramatically, it was failing gradually, like a building settling into unstable ground. Tom called an emergency meeting for 11:30 a.m. I watched through the glass walls as the senior engineering team gathered around a conference table covered with laptops and printed error logs. Jessica looked pale. David kept refreshing his monitoring dashboard. Tom's corporate confidence had evaporated into something that looked like panic. Maya found me at Lunch with an expression that mixed concern and curiosity. They're saying it's a server configuration issue, she said, sitting down with her salad. Hardware problems that will be resolved by end of business. What do you think? I think they don't know what's wrong and they're hoping it fixes itself. The afternoon brought escalation. Hartwell's IT director called Tom directly, demanding explanations that Tom couldn't provide. Their compliance team flagged 17 separate security violations. Their user base started reporting transaction failures that could cost millions in lost revenue. By 4 p.m. the emergency meeting had become a crisis management session. By 5 p.m. they'd brought in external consultants. By 6 p.m. the consultants were asking questions that nobody could answer. The external team leader was a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in enterprise system failures. Her preliminary assessment was delivered with the kind of clinical precision that made bad news sound even worse. This appears to be a fundamental architecture problem, not a deployment issue. The system is failing at multiple points simultaneously, suggesting either catastrophic hardware failure or incomplete code implementation. Incomplete code implementation was consultant speak for you don't know what you're doing. The authentication module is missing critical error handling. The database layer lacks proper connection pooling. The API endpoints don't include standard timeout protocols. This looks like a system that was partially reverse engineered from an original design. Partially reverse engineered was consultant speak for you stole this and botched it. Tom's response was predictable and desperate. Our senior engineers developed this system in-house using industry standard practices. Dr. Chen pulled up a terminal window and started typing commands that made David Kim look uncomfortable. Industry standard practices would include comprehensive testing, proper documentation, and complete implementation. What I'm seeing here suggests someone built a sophisticated system that was then incompletely replicated by people who didn't understand the underlying architecture. Incompletely replicated was consultant speak for fraud. I left the office at 6:30 p.m. while the crisis management session was still in progress, drove home through Austin traffic that felt lighter than usual, and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and the USB drive that contained the real system. The kill switch had worked perfectly. Tuesday morning brought the kind of corporate panic that spreads through open floor plans like wildfire. Hartwell Bank had suspended their contract pending resolution of the system failures. Meridian Tech was demanding immediate fixes for similar problems on their platform. Vertex Capital was threatening to move their business to a more reliable vendor. The financial impact was immediate and devastating. 3 major clients representing 60% of GridForge's revenue had either suspended contracts or demanded penalty payments for service disruptions. Tom Hensley looked like he hadn't slept. His usual corporate polish replaced by the kind of desperation that made expensive suits look cheap. He called another emergency meeting for 8 a.m. with the entire engineering team, including me. We need all hands on deck to resolve these issues, he announced. Every available developer, every system administrator, everyone with technical knowledge needs to focus on stabilizing our client systems. Every available developer included the contractor they'd exiled to the basement. Jessica Torres approached my desk that afternoon with the kind of reluctant humility that suggested she'd been ordered to swallow her pride. Brooke, we need your help understanding some of the optimization code you worked on earlier this year. Optimization code was corporate speak for the system you built that we can't replicate. The Hartwell integration is experiencing some performance issues that might be related to database query efficiency. Performance issues was corporate speak for complete failure. We're hoping you might have some insights into the original architecture decisions. Insights was corporate speak for please fix what we broke. I looked at Jessica standing there asking for help with code she'd claimed credit for, systems she'd presented to clients as her own work, architecture she'd been billing premium rates to maintain. I'd be happy to help, I said, but I'll need full access to the production environment, admin privileges, and documentation of all changes made since the original implementation. Full access was developer speak for I want to see everything you did wrong. Jessica's smile was strained. We'll need to check with Tom about access levels. Tom's response came back within an hour: full production access, temporary admin privileges, and a desperate request for immediate assistance in stabilizing the client systems. I spent Tuesday afternoon reviewing their butchered version of my code. It was worse than I'd imagined. They'd removed critical error handling, simplified complex functions, and eliminated safeguards that prevented exactly the kind of failures they were experiencing. Wednesday morning brought the call that changed everything. Hartwell Bank's legal department informed GridForge that they were conducting a comprehensive audit of all contracted services, including a review of system architecture, billing practices, and technical documentation. Any discrepancies between promised deliverables and actual systems would result in breach of contract proceedings. Breach of contract was legal speak for we're going to sue you for everything. Maya found me at my desk with a printed email that she slid across my monitor without saying anything. The subject line read internal investigation and the sender was GridForge's board of directors. The email announced that pending resolution of client System issues. The company was conducting an internal review of project management billing practices and technical deliverables. All employees were required to preserve documentation and make themselves available for interviews with external auditors. Preserve documentation was legal speak for the evidence is about to matter. I looked at Maya, who was waiting for my reaction to the news that GridForge was about to be torn apart by investigators. How are you feeling about all this? She asked. Quietly, I thought about the kill switch that had worked perfectly, the documentation I'd compiled over weeks of exile, the evidence that proved who had really built the systems they'd been selling. Honestly, I said, I'm feeling pretty good. That evening I received a text from an unknown number. This is Ari Zhang, time to talk. The meeting with Ari Zhang happened at a coffee shop near the University of Texas campus, far enough from downtown Austin to avoid any chance encounters with GridForge. Employees. Ari looked exactly like their LinkedIn photo from 2 years ago. Sharp features, dark hair pulled back, and the kind of focused intensity that suggested they'd been thinking about this conversation for months. You probably know why I reached out, Ari said, settling into a chair by the window with coffee that had already gone cold. Because GridForge is imploding and you want to watch it burn. Ari's laugh was sharp. Because GridForge has been running a systematic fraud for years and you're the first person with enough evidence to prove it. They opened a laptop that looked military-grade secure and pulled up files that made my documentation look amateur by comparison. I've been tracking their billing practices since I left. Financial records from clients' internal emails between executives, detailed analysis of code attribution going back 3 years. The evidence was comprehensive and damning. Hartwell Bank paying $400 per hour for work performed by $15 contractors. Meridian Tech being charged for senior architect time on projects built entirely by junior developers. Vertex Capital receiving bills for custom development that was actually open source code with minimal modifications. The Department of Technology Oversight has been investigating contract fraud in the Austin tech sector for 6 months, Ari continued. They're specifically looking at companies that misrepresent their technical capabilities to government and financial clients. The Department of Technology Oversight was federal jurisdiction. Serious consequences, $1 million fines and potential criminal charges. They contacted me last week about GridForge, asked if I knew anyone with direct knowledge of billing discrepancies or code attribution fraud. Ari slid a business card across the table. Federal investigator Sarah Rodriguez, specializing in technology contract violations. She wants to talk to you specifically about the systems you built and how they were represented to clients. I stared at the business card, thinking about the choice that was being offered to me. Cooperation with federal investigators meant validation, recognition, official acknowledgement that I'd built the systems GridForge had been selling. It also meant burning every bridge I'd ever tried to build in Austin's tight-knit tech community. What happens if I call her? She'll want to see your original code documentation, timestamps, anything that proves you built the systems they're billing for, and then GridForge gets investigated for contract fraud. Their clients get refunded for misrepresented services, and the people who actually did the work get official recognition. Official recognition was government speak for your name on the systems you built. What happens to Tom and Jessica and David depends on how cooperative they are during the investigation, but probably fired, possibly facing charges if they knowingly participated in billing fraud. Ari leaned back in their chair. Brooke, this isn't just about you. This is about every developer who's been exploited, every contractor who's been cheated, every person whose work has been stolen by people who couldn't code their way out of a paper bag. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than any technical challenge I'd ever faced. I need time to think about it. Sarah Rodriguez is expecting your call by Friday morning. After that, she'll move forward with the investigation using whatever evidence she has, with or without me, was the implication. I drove home through Austin traffic, thinking about choices and consequences, about the difference between revenge and justice, about the systems I'd built and the credit I'd never received. That evening I sat at my kitchen table with Rodriguez's business card next to my laptop, the encrypted drive containing my original system plugged in, and waiting. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Tom just called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. Rumor is they're bringing in crisis management consultants. Crisis management was corporate speak for damage control. Another text arrived an hour later, this one from an unknown number. This is Tom Hensley. We need to talk about resolving the current situation in a way that works for everyone. Resolving the situation was executive speak for buying my silence. Works for everyone was executive speak for works for us. I didn't respond to Tom's text. Instead, I opened my laptop and started reviewing the evidence I'd compiled. Weeks of documentation proving systematic fraud, months of billing records showing stolen credit, years of code attribution that told the real story of who had built what. The evidence was overwhelming and bulletproof. My phone rang at 9:47 p.m. Caller ID showed Maya Ramirez. Brooke, don't answer any calls from GridForge tonight. Tom's been trying to reach you for hours. I saw his text. There's something else. Maya's voice carried The kind of tension that suggested she was about to share something important. I've been documenting things: 2 billing discrepancies, project timelines, code attribution patterns. Maya had been building her own paper trail. Why? Because I've watched them steal credit from good developers for 2 years and I'm tired of being complicit. Complicit was moral speak for I helped them do it. What are you going to do? Depends on what you decide to do, but if you call that federal investigator, you won't be alone. The support felt unexpected and valuable. Maya, why are you telling me this? Because you're the best developer I've ever worked with and they treated you like you were disposable because the system you built could revolutionize enterprise infrastructure and they're too incompetent to understand what they had because you deserve credit for your work and they deserve consequences for stealing it. After Maya hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment thinking about recognition and validation, about the difference between being right and being heard, about the choice between walking away quietly and letting the truth do the talking. At 11:23 p.m. another text arrived from Ari Zhang. Rodriguez got additional evidence today. Recorded conversation between Tom Hensley and Hartwell Bank's CEO. Tom explicitly claimed credit for architecture decisions you made. The investigation is moving forward with or without your cooperation, but your testimony would make it airtight. Recorded conversation was legal speak for smoking gun. The choice was being made for me. I picked up Rodriguez's business card and dialed her number. Agent Rodriguez, this is Brooke Carter. I understand you want to talk about GridForge. Her response was immediate and professional. Ms. Carter, I've been hoping you'd call. We have a lot to discuss. When can we meet? How about tomorrow morning 9 a.m. Federal Building downtown. Bring any documentation you have regarding your work at GridForge. Any documentation meant everything. Agent Rodriguez, what happens to GridForge when this is over? Her pause suggested she'd been asked this question before. That depends on what we find, but companies that defraud federal contractors don't usually survive the investigation. I hung up the phone and spent the rest of the night preparing files that would end GridForge's fraudulent business model forever. By dawn, I had everything organized, timestamped, and encrypted. It was time to let my code do the talking. The Federal Building downtown Austin looked exactly like every government building I'd ever seen. Concrete and glass designed to project authority and permanence. Agent Sarah Rodriguez met me in the lobby at exactly 9 a.m. with the kind of professional handshake that suggested she'd been doing this for years. Ms. Carter, thank you for coming in. We have a lot to cover. The conference room on the 14th floor had windows that overlooked the Austin skyline, including the glass tower where GridForge was probably having another emergency meeting about system failures and client defections. Rodriguez spread my documentation across a table that could seat 12 people. This is comprehensive, she said, reviewing the timestamps, billing records, and code attribution logs I'd compiled. How long did it take you to gather all this? About 6 weeks. But some of it goes back to my first day at GridForge. Rodriguez pulled out a digital recorder with the kind of formal ceremony that made everything feel official. With your permission, I'd like to record our conversation. This testimony may be used in federal proceedings against GridForge and potentially individual executives. Federal proceedings was legal speak for serious criminal charges. I nodded and she pressed record. For the record, this is Agent Sarah Rodriguez, Department of Technology Oversight, interviewing Brooke Carter regarding contract fraud allegations against GridForge Technologies. The questions started simple: employment dates, job responsibilities, hourly wages, then moved into technical details: system architecture, code ownership, billing practices. Walk me through the Hartwell Bank integration. Who designed it? Who built it? Who tested it? I designed the entire architecture, built all the core modules, and wrote the testing protocols. Jessica Torres reviewed my work for compliance but didn't contribute any original code. David Kim handled the deployment but didn't understand the underlying system. Who was billed to the client for this work? According to the invoices, I saw Jessica Torres as senior architect, David Kim as lead developer, and Tom Hensley as project oversight, all at $400 per hour. What was your compensation for this work? $15 per hour as a contractor. No benefits, no recognition, no attribution. Rodriguez made notes that looked detailed and damning. The system that failed this week, how does it relate to your original work? They tried to reverse engineer my code without understanding the architecture, removed critical error handling, simplified complex functions, and eliminated safeguards that prevent exactly the kind of failures they experienced. Do you still have access to the original functional system? I have the complete system encrypted on personal hardware with full documentation and version history. Rodriguez leaned forward. Would you be willing to demonstrate the differences between your original system and their failed implementation? Absolutely. The demonstration took place in a secure computer lab 2 floors down. I connected my encrypted drive to an isolated terminal and walked Rodriguez through my original code compared to the broken version GridForge had deployed. The differences were stark and undeniable. My system handled authentication failures gracefully. Their version crashed when servers were overloaded. My code included comprehensive error logging. Their implementation suppressed critical warnings. My architecture scaled automatically. Their approach required manual intervention that they didn't Know how to perform. This is clearly the work of a sophisticated developer, Rodriguez said, reviewing my code comments and documentation. Someone with deep understanding of enterprise system requirements. GridForge senior engineers couldn't replicate this level of technical competence. No, they couldn't, which is why they kept me around to fix their problems while billing clients for senior architect work. Rodriguez closed her laptop. Brooke, this evidence is exactly what we need to prove systematic fraud, but I want you to understand what happens next. What happens next was legal speak for consequences. GridForge will be charged with federal contract fraud. Their executives will face individual criminal charges. Their clients will be entitled to full refunds for misrepresented services. Full refunds meant millions of dollars. The company will likely declare bankruptcy and cease operations. Cease operations meant everyone loses their jobs, including Maya. Are you prepared for that outcome? I thought about Maya, who'd supported me quietly, about Noah, who'd abandoned me strategically, about the other developers who'd stayed silent while watching fraud happen daily. What about the people who weren't involved in the fraud? Employees who weren't complicit will receive assistance finding new positions. Our investigation has identified several companies that need experienced developers with clean records. Clean records meant people like Maya. What about the people who were complicit but not in leadership positions? Depends on their level of cooperation during the investigation. People who provide testimony and documentation typically avoid criminal charges. Cooperation meant throwing Tom and Jessica under the bus. That afternoon, Rodriguez walked me through the timeline of the federal investigation. GridForge would be raided tomorrow morning. Their servers seized, their financial records confiscated, their executives arrested. Arrested was criminal speak for handcuffs and perp walks. We'll need you to stay available for additional testimony, but your part of the investigation is essentially complete. Complete meant I'd done everything required to destroy the company that had stolen my work. I drove home through Austin traffic that felt different, lighter somehow. Like a weight had been lifted from the entire city. Maya texted me as I pulled into my apartment complex. Tom just announced that GridForge is suspending all operations effective immediately. Something about a federal investigation. All employees are being sent home with pay pending resolution. Suspending operations was corporate speak for we're fucked. Another text arrived an hour later, this one from Ari Zhang. News is spreading fast through the Austin tech community. Everyone knows what GridForge was doing and who really built those systems. You're about to become famous in the best possible way. Famous felt strange after months of being invisible. My phone rang at 6 p.m. Maya's name on the caller ID. Brooke, what did you do? I told the truth about who built what. Maya's laugh carried relief and admiration. The whole company is in chaos. Tom's not answering his phone. Jessica's cleared out her office. David's updating his LinkedIn profile. Updating LinkedIn was corporate speak for looking for a new job. What about you? Federal agents interviewed me this afternoon, asked about documentation I'd been keeping. Turns out I had more evidence than I realized. More evidence meant Maya had been protecting herself. They offered me a position with the consulting firm that's helping GridForge's clients transition to new vendors. Consulting firm meant legitimate work with proper attribution. Brooke, there's something else. Something else was usually important. Hartwell Bank called me directly. They want to contract with whoever built their original system. They're willing to pay proper rates for proper work. Proper rates meant respect and recognition. They specifically asked for Brooke Carter, my name attached to my work. Finally that evening I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open and the encrypted drive that contained my complete system. The kill switch was no longer necessary. The fraud had been exposed. The truth was official and my work was finally mine. I opened a new document and started typing. Carter Systems Architectural Consulting and Enterprise Development, founded by Brooke Carter, Austin, Texas. The business plan wrote itself. 6 months later, I was sitting in a conference room on the 20th floor of a downtown Austin office building with windows that overlooked the space where GridForge used to be. The building had been sold, the equipment auctioned. The executives convicted. Hartwell Bank sat across from me with a contract worth more than I'd made in 2 years at GridForge. Maya sat to my left as my first full-time employee. Ari Zhang joined by video conference from San Francisco, where they were running their own successful consulting firm. Carter Systems will provide comprehensive back-end architecture with full documentation, proper attribution, and transparent billing, I said, presenting the proposal. No hidden fees, no misrepresented capabilities, no stolen credit. The Hartwell representative smiled. That's exactly what we need, someone who understands that trust is the foundation of any technical partnership. Trust was business speak for what GridForge had destroyed after they left Maya and I sat in the empty conference room looking out at Austin's skyline. How does it feel? She asked. Getting everything you deserved. Honestly, it feels like the beginning, not the end, because it was Carter Systems was growing. Hartwell had referred 3 other clients. Ari was sending overflow work from California. The Austin tech community was recommending us to anyone who needed real technical expertise. My name was on my work. My rates reflected my value. My reputation was built on systems That actually functioned. The USB drive that had contained my kill switch sat in a desk drawer, now obsolete, replaced by proper contracts, legal agreements, and the kind of professional recognition that made secrets unnecessary. Tom Hensley was serving 18 months in federal prison. Jessica Torres was working retail while appealing her conviction. David Kim had left Austin entirely. Noah Whitaker sent me a LinkedIn message asking if Carter Systems was hiring. I didn't respond. Some bridges weren't worth rebuilding. 1 year after Gridforge's collapse, investigative journalist Sarah Chen, not the consultant but a different Sarah entirely, reached out through my business email asking for an interview about the case that had become a landmark prosecution in federal contract fraud. The Gridforge investigation changed how federal agencies evaluate technical contracts, she explained over coffee at the same shop where I'd met Ari Zhang. Your testimony established precedents for code attribution, intellectual property theft, and billing fraud in the tech industry. Precedence was legal speak for permanent change. I'd like to write a comprehensive expose about systematic exploitation in Austin's tech scene with Gridforge as the centerpiece. Expose was journalism speak for public reckoning. I stirred my coffee thinking about fame and attention, about the difference between being heard and being understood, about the choice between private victory and public vindication. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not interested in being the face of this story. Sarah looked surprised. But you're the whistleblower who brought down a multi-million-dollar fraud operation. People want to know who you are, what motivated you, how you built the evidence. Who you are was journalist speak for celebrity profile. The evidence speaks for itself. The systems I built are still running. The clients are satisfied. The fraud has been exposed. But your personal story, the David versus Goliath narrative. The brilliant developer fighting corporate exploitation. That's compelling. Human interest. Human interest was media speak for entertainment. My story isn't about fighting anyone, it's about building systems that work and making sure the right people get credit for the right work. Sarah leaned forward with the kind of persistence that suggested she wasn't giving up easily. Brooke, this case has inspired other developers to come forward about similar fraud patterns across the country. Your courage to speak up started a movement. Movement was activists speak for something bigger than one person. That's great, but the movement doesn't need my face on it. It needs good systems and honest billing and developers who understand their own worth. Sarah made notes that looked disappointed but respectful. Would you be willing to provide technical commentary for the article without personal details? Technical commentary was journalist speak for expert analysis. Sure, but only about the systems and the evidence, not about my motivations or personal journey. The article published 3 months later under the headline, How Systematic Code Theft Built Austin's Tech Boom and Why Federal Investigators Are Just Getting Started, my name appeared exactly twice, once as the developer who originally built the contested systems, and once as founder of Carter Systems, the consulting firm that now maintains the infrastructure. No photos, no personal background, no David versus Goliath narrative, just technical facts, legal outcomes, and systematic change. Perfect. The article triggered congressional hearings about contract fraud in government technology procurement, which led to new federal guidelines for technical consulting, which created industry standards for code attribution, which established legal protections for developers whose work was being stolen. Systematic change without personal celebrity. Carter Systems grew steadily throughout the year. We hired 6 developers, including 2 who'd been exploited by companies similar to Gridforge. Maya became our operations director. Ari Zhang joined our board of advisors. We established an Austin office in a building that prioritized function over flashy amenities. No kombucha taps, no ping pong tables, no nap pods, just good equipment, proper compensation, and the kind of professional respect that made work satisfying. My desk had a nameplate that read Brooke Carter, founder and chief architect. The title felt earned in a way that corporate promotions never had, because it represented work I'd actually done, systems I'd actually built, recognition I'd actually deserved. The USB drive that had once contained my secret system now sat in a safety deposit box, not because the information was still secret, but because it represented something worth preserving, evidence that individual competence could triumph over institutional fraud, that quiet persistence could defeat loud incompetence, that building excellent systems was more powerful than building personal brands. Hartwell Bank renewed their contract for the 3rd consecutive quarter with a rate increase that reflected the value Carter Systems provided. Meridian Tech became a client after their previous vendor couldn't replicate the security protocols we'd implemented. Vertex Capital referred us to 2 other financial firms who needed enterprise architecture that actually functioned, proper work for proper pay with proper attribution. Friday afternoon brought the kind of calm satisfaction that came from problems solved correctly. The Austin office was quiet. Most of the team had left early for weekend plans. Maya was finishing quarterly reports in the conference room. Ari was presenting our architecture methodology at a conference in Seattle. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Tom Hensley. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted you to know that what happened at Gridforge taught me something important about respect and recognition. I'm working construction now, and it's honest work for honest pay. I wanted To apologize for not recognizing your contributions when it mattered. Honest work was personal speak for lessons learned. I read the message twice then deleted it without responding. Some apologies mattered more than others, but the most important recognition had already been achieved. My systems were running under my name at companies that valued technical excellence. My rates reflected my expertise. My reputation was built on work that actually functioned properly. The plaque on my desk read, "Build first, speak when ready," a reminder that the best advocacy was excellent systems that solved real problems. Maya knocked on my office door holding a printed email, new client inquiry from a federal agency. They specifically asked for Carter systems based on our reputation for technical integrity. Technical integrity was government speak for what GridForge had lacked. They want to discuss a comprehensive infrastructure overhaul for their citizen services platform. Comprehensive infrastructure was government speak for the kind of project that could define a company's legacy. I looked out the window at Austin's skyline at the space where GridForge's building used to stand, now occupied by a startup that developed educational software for underprivileged students. Better use of the space. Schedule a meeting for next week, I said. Let's see what they need, because building systems that mattered was still the most satisfying work I could imagine. The kill switch was obsolete. The evidence was preserved, the fraud was exposed, and my legacy was written in code that carried my name, not in silence anymore, but in systems that spoke for themselves. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe, it would mean a lot.